So earlier this week, I looked at the idea of creating these shortcut routes in an Angular application in order to hide some of the implementation details of the routing system, and also to provide ways to link or deep link to parts of the application where the link may not be accessible before the application state is loaded into memory. Now, in the previous approach, when I had shortcuts that had dynamic data embedded, so parameters embedded within the shortcut itself, right? Whereas opposed to like profile and prototypes, which are static, here I'm linking to comments with a conversation ID and a comment ID. In my first approach, I was manually parsing these parameters out of the shortcut tokens. But it occurred to me that I have this big, beautiful Angular router at my disposal, and the Angular router is perfect for parsing URLs. So rather than me trying to do it with regular expressions, despite the fact that I love regular expressions, I want to be able to move this kind of heavy lifting into the Angular router configuration so that I can keep the redirect logic of my Go view component as simple as possible. And it turns out this is quite easy because we can map multiple routes onto a single view component. So if we look at my router configuration, right, here's my router module, and here's my Go prefix, because all of my shortcuts come after Go. What you'll see is that I'm still using a single Go view component, but I'm now mapping multiple routes onto that same component. For the most part, I'm just going to use the wildcard sync match in order to capture all of the post-Go route segments. But for the more complex routes that have embedded parameters, I'm going to define those as additional routes so that the Angular router will parse those into the params object, and then I can access these parameters on the params object inside of my GoView component. Now you notice that this first one also provides a data object that explicitly provides a shortcut. And this would be in cases where the route itself doesn't naturally map onto a particular shortcut. So in this case, I'm taking comment and I actually want to map over to inbox. It's just optional. If I exclude this, it would use the first segment anyway. So let's take a look now at the GoView component. So the GoView component obviously needs to get the activated route so that I can see those parsed parameters in the URL segments, and then I'm going to be using the router to perform the actual redirect logic. But now if we look at my ng on init, I'm going to subscribe to changes in the data object, and I could have subscribed to a whole number of things here. But essentially what this is doing now is grabbing the params, those parsed route parameters, off of the activated route snapshot, and then I'm simply looking at the shortcut, which is either the data provided shortcut or the URL segments, switching on those, and then using them to perform the navigate by URL redirection. And you can see here when I'm mapping the inbox shortcut onto a target URL, I'm able to grab the conversation ID and the comment ID right out of that parsed params object. So the Angular router, because of my multi-route mapping onto the single view component, is now parsing the parameters out of the route and again providing those in my Go view component in the params object that I'm pulling out of the activated route snapshot. So it keeps the redirect logic all basically in the same place, but it removes all of that heavy lifting and regular expression pattern matching that I was using to manually parse the routes and pull out those embedded parameters. Now just quickly, let's take a look at the get shortcut, and you can see where that data object comes into play. So here, again, I'm taking the snapshot of the activated route. I'm looking to see if that shortcut is provided on that data object, and if it is, I'm just going to use that as my shortcut. Otherwise, I'm going to look at the URL segments, I'm going to pluck out the paths, and then if I have parameters, so if I have an embedded parameter, I'm going to use just the first index. Or if I don't have parameters, I'm just going to use all of the indexes and join them together with a slash. And that's the entire logic there of that GoView component. Again, the trade-off here is that I'm sort of distributing some of the shortcut configuration in that these routes are now, the complex routes are now defined in the router configuration, and then the redirect is defined in my GoView component. But to me, that's a trade-off that gains a lot of simplicity, straightforwardness, and I think ease of maintenance here. Because again, by putting the routes with embedded parameters into the router configuration, I'm getting the Angular router to do all of that heavy lifting for me in terms of parsing the route and extracting embedded parameters. And all I'm doing is then consuming those parameters inside of my GoView component and performing the redirect logic. So again, just kind of closing the loop on this concept of shortcuts, I appreciated the sort of uniformity of my first approach, but I felt that that uniformity came at the cost of complexity. And now, by mapping multiple routes onto a single view component, I'm losing a little bit of that uniformity, but I'm gaining a lot more simplicity and maintainability.